It's the semi-final of the World Cup. Ramesh Babu, Praggnanandhaa playing against Fabiano Caruana. And the first two classical games have ended in a draw, which means tiebreak time. Also, the first two tiebreak games have ended in a draw. And we are going to have a look at the crucial game, the fifth game of their match, with a shorter time control, 10 minutes plus 10 seconds increment. And let's see what's going to happen. Praggnanandhaa playing with the white pieces, and he is having a great tournament. And keep in mind that he also already eliminated one of the pre-tournament favorites, Hikaru Nakamura, in a tiebreak. And that's something I covered on my own channel, PowerPlayChess, as well. So feel free to have a look there as well. This time he is facing another very strong American player, Fabiano Caruana, world's number 3. Praggnanandhaa starts with 1 e4, and after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, we get the Italian opening, knight f6, d3, solid line, and various ways of playing here. Bishop c5 is considered to be the most active continuation, but bishop e7 is also perfectly playable. White castles, black does the same, and now it's knight c3, trying to get a grip on the d5 square. Simple development, not too theoretical, and that's something probably Praggnanandhaa wanted to avoid, a theoretical battle, just to get a playable position. And let's see what happens then. d6, with the idea to protect the pawn, and black is ready to play knight a5, trying to catch the bishop on c4. Therefore a4 is the right move, so that the bishop can always drop back to a2 once it comes under threat. Maybe a5 can be played anytime. And Caruana has the idea to play here bishop g4. Very concrete idea to pin the knight on f3, intending to play knight e4, pressurizing the knight and trying to force a weakening of white's kingside structure. So white goes h3, and this is an important moment. What is black gonna do? The bishop is under threat. Can of course take here on f3, but after queen takes f3, knight e4, attacking the queen and the pawn. The queen will come back, and okay, you have just given up the bishop pair. It's not clear if this is something what black really wants. Has been played before by, amongst others, Magnus Carlsen. The idea could be to play c6 followed by d5. But Caruana had a different plan. Wants to maintain the tension by dropping back with the bishop to h5. So knight e4 is still on the agenda. Bishop e3. So the bishop is controlling the d4 square, but the knight comes there anyway. Intending to weaken white's kingside by doubling the pawns. So bishop takes d4, e takes d4, and now it's black who has a doubled pawn in the center. Knight to d5, offering the exchange of knights, which is something black wanted to do. Bishop takes d5. So in certain cases, pawn on b7 is hanging. Black goes for the move c6, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to b3. And we have interesting imbalance in structure. Bishop pair versus pawn structure. So you can see that white, if it were allowed to play one more move, it would probably go for the move g4 to unpin the knight on f3, so that you're ready to take on d4, winning a pawn. Therefore, bishop takes f3 on the board, queen takes f3. And at first it looks as if white is a bit better here, because of the nice bishop on b3, queen on f3, and, well, very soon after black played g6, the queen moved away, king g7 played, and now white launches its f-pawn. Looks as if white gets very easy play on the king side, but things are far from simple. Black is very solid. Queen c7, connecting the rooks. Rook a e1, so white also brings its own rook into play. Rook a e8, and you may think, what is white going to do? And it's very tempting here to play a move like f5, which was actually not played in the game. I want to show you why this was not played, because after something like h5, attacking the queen goes back to f3. Black is going to put its bishop on f6, intending to follow up with a move like rook e5, and black gets a very nice grip on these dark squares. For instance, after f takes g6, the rook protects the bishop, so there's no time for white to win that piece there. So it's not that easy for white at all to mobilize its pawn majority, and therefore Prag plays a very slow move, but he is not in a rush at all. He can play here the move queen f3. That's absolutely fine. Queen goes back to d7, just slightly improving that piece. The rook comes to e2. And Caruana thinks, okay, my bishop on e7 is not doing much. Let's try to activate it by playing the move bishop to d8. It's not only trying to improve the bishop. Maybe the bishop can be employed somewhere on this diagonal, but it also frees the path of the rook on the e-file. King h1, useful waiting move, and now Caruana sees a nice opportunity and goes for the move d5, trying to open the center. And this is a very good idea, because if white doesn't do anything about that pawn on d5, the bishop on b3 will remain out of play for a long period of time. For instance, a move like e5, advancing in the center, leaves this bishop out of play. That's not very nice. Black can just play something like f6 to try to trade off that pawn. So better continuation is to take the pawn on d5. And the pawn is still well supported by both the queen and bishop. So in fact, this is a pawn sacrifice. With black, Fabiano is also trying to put Praggnanandhaa under pressure. Rook takes e2, queen takes e2, rook e8. Occupying the open file, attacking the queen, and before moving the queen away, white first captures on c6, because if the queen on e2 is captured, there is c takes d7, and white is still 2 pawns up. B takes c6, just a simple recapture. The queen on e2 is under threat. Queen goes to f2, and black is a pawn down, but still there is quite reasonable compensation. Why? You may think, well, first of all, there is this rook on e8, which can, for instance, be anchored on the e3 square. But also the dark squares are quite vulnerable, and with major pieces and only opposite colored bishops on the board, it's also about king safety. And I think that with a move like bishop c7, this bishop is looking excellent, eyeing the white king on this diagonal. If white is ever going to push the pawn to f5, queen can come to d6, and that's a very strong battery of queen and bishop. Know that white is not really able to play rook e1. Rooks will be exchanged on e1, queen takes e1, after which the pawn on f4 is hanging as well. So I think there's reasonable compensation, but being low on time, a pawn is a pawn. Black played instead a move queen to d6. I'm not sure this is the most precise continuation, because now white can play the move g3. And this is a welcome improvement of white's king's position, because you're protecting the pawn on f4. And had the queen still been on d7, that pawn on h3 would have been hanging. Now, move rook e3 was played, and white goes rook e1. So pawn protects pawn. So white wants to trade off more and more pieces. Bishop goes to b6. That was Fabiano's idea. He didn't want to place the bishop on c7, rather on b6, because obviously after you take on e3, the d pawn recaptures and attacks the queen. You get a passed pawn. White doesn't have to capture yet. Play the move king to g2. And now the move queen f6, so that if white is ever going to take that rook on e3, d takes e3, attacking the queen, and also the pawn on b2. That's the idea behind black's previous move. White goes bishop c4, just step by step improving its position. The king is actually relatively safe on the light squares. There are no checks. Black goes a5 to prevent white from ever moving the pawn to b4. That's a nice technical move. And here white played the move queen to f1. Now you may think this looks very passive. Why would you do it? Well, with the idea to take on e3. And after d takes e3, the queen on f2, it's not under threat. And I think this is the critical moment of the match, because black has decent compensation here. If he continues with a move like h5, planning to undermine white's king side with a move h4, after rook takes e3, d takes e3, attacking the pawn on b2, white plays c3 for instance, and now I think the move h4 is very nice, putting pressure against the pawn on g3. And after g4 try to keep the position closed, black's idea is to play e2, queen takes e2, queen takes f4. And despite being a pawn down with opposite colored bishops and vulnerable dark squares, there are definitely counter chances for black against the white king. I don't see any serious problems, to be honest. But Fabiano instead didn't play h5. He played here the move bishop to c5. Looks like a waiting move, but a very unfortunate one. Because after rook takes e3, d takes e3, white is going to play the move c3 anyway. And the plan is to play d4 next, so that the bishop is under threat, disconnecting the bishop from supporting the pawn on e3. If you can eliminate that pawn on e3, well, black is in serious trouble. So the bishop even went back to b6. That's a very sad move, enabling white to play queen f3. Nice consolidating move. Queen to e7, threatening to push the pawn, so you got to be careful. The king goes back to f1. White has a typical light square strategy. He has control over the light squares. Black cannot challenge the light squares with a dark squared bishop. And after bishop a7, it's not clear what black should do else. There is king to e2. The king is nicely blockading the pawn on e3. Queen b7, trying to attack the pawn. White plays b3. Everything is nicely protected. Black goes back with the queen to e7, trying to sneak in with the queen via a3 to b2. But now the move d4 is an excellent idea, so that the bishop is out of play and the pawn on e3 can be taken next. Black tries to steer things up with the move c5. The pawn on e3 can actually be taken already, but Prag had a different idea. Played here the move d5. He has a passed pawn. Pawn on e3 is not running away. Bishop on a7 is really out of play. Bishop to b8, queen takes e3. That is pawn number 2, offering the exchange of queens. And now in opposite colored bishop endgames, there is actually quite a serious chance that the games end in a draw, as the bishops cannot challenge each other, and black has a nice grip on the dark squares. But trading of queens is not ideal. I think black should really try to play actively here with the move queen f6. Probably Fabi didn't want to go for this move because of queen takes c5, as the pawn is hanging. But after queen takes c3, white should probably be winning if he goes for the move queen b6. But allowing such a queen to c3 with a bunch of checks coming up is incredibly impractical. So after queen takes e3, Fabi wanted to drop back with the queen to f8, but there is this move, bishop to b5. And I like this move a lot, because now consolidating your position with bishop d6 will be met by queen e8, forcing the exchange of queens. Brilliant idea, maybe not brilliant, but just a really good idea, so that after swapping these queens, the king is able to walk in and probably collect another pawn. Therefore, the queen now went back to d6, but after bishop c6, white has improved its bishop. It's supporting the pawn on d5, bishop c7, king d3, queen f6, pawn on c5 can be taken, but you don't have to capture that pawn. King c4 is a much better move. At least I like it more from a human perspective. The king is on its way to b5. Bishop d6, queen e4, protecting everything still here. g5, looking for counterplay. What else should black do? F takes g5. And now queen f1 was the idea. With check. Fortunately, you can still block with the queen. So the endgame with bishops only should be technically winning. Queen takes h3. So the queen collects a pawn, but now the king comes in to b5, intending to take the pawn on a5. After bishop takes g3, for instance, the d-pawn is gonna be pushed. So that is not an option for black. Queen instead went to g4, but now after king takes a5, you can take on g5, but the king comes back to b5. The king is absolutely safe. The black queen is really far away, and after bishop takes g3, now the a pawn is activated. Bishop goes back to d6, a6, queen e7, controlling the next square from the a pawn, queen to f3, so that after a move like bishop b8, you can give a check, asking the king where it's going. If it goes to the back rank, there's queen c8 with a double attack on the king and bishop. King h6, queen c8 played anyway. The bishop is in trouble. Bishop went to f4, and now it's queen to d7. If the queens are coming off the board, the a-pawn is only 2 steps away from the promotion square. For instance, if you take bishop b8, you can even bring up your king, followed by king b7, attacking the bishop, after which the a-pawn decides the game. Black doesn't want to exchange queens, played here queen e2, but after king b6, the king is actually nicely hiding behind its own pawns on b3 and c3, but also the pawn on c5 is standing in the way. Therefore, the move c4 tried. But now, okay, maybe a move like a7 can be played, but it allows black to go for bishop e3, sacrifice the bishop, and then take on b3. It's probably winning for white as well. No need to allow it, though. b4 is probably just a more pragmatic decision, not to give black a chance to create a passed pawn. Queen e3, king goes back to b5. No more checks, nicely surrounded by its own pieces. a7, a8, queen is on the agenda. Queen takes c3, a7. The pawn is out of reach. Queen d3. White gets a new queen. c3 check. Finally, there is a check. King b6. Queen e3. King b7. The checks are over. White has an extra queen. Looks as if it should just be game over, but black still tries the move c2. Also, black is just one move away from getting a second queen, but that's just way too slow. Queen f8 with check was played. Black king tries to run away, but then it's queen g7, and Fabi lost his first game of the World Cup. After king h4, it is queen to g4 with checkmate, and therefore he just resigned in the position after queen to g7. In the must-win game, in game 6, he just didn't manage to pose Prag any serious problems, and therefore Praggnanandhaa is in the final. He is the youngest World Cup finalist ever, with just only 18 years old. And now he is going to face Magnus Carlsen in that final. And that's going to be really exciting. Of course, this will all be covered on the PowerPlayChess channel, but definitely also on my own channel, Robert Riss Chess. So please have a look there as well. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll be soon back again. Bye bye.